Today we're going to look at tough decisions of a personal and professional nature. Just explain to us how you make those kind of decisions in the workplace.
I think it's important to try and get a picture of what the reference points are for making those decisions. Now, the first of these I would see as following God. And you say, well, yeah, but what aspect of God? And the answer is follow the wisdom of God. I love Eugene Peterson's introduction to the book of Proverbs when he talks about wisdom as being living skillfully in whatever the circumstances might be.
So where do you get that wisdom? Because I'm thinking of somewhere like James 3, where James, as a writer, compares earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. If you're in the middle of a key decision in the workplace or in your own personal life, how would you go about pursuing godly wisdom?
Well, I think the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But Proverbs, above everyone else, all the other books, is just practical, day-to-day, skillful living under God.
Do you read the Proverbs regularly? Do you have any discipline of immersing yourself in this wisdom?
Yeah, pretty well. I do read a lot of the Proverbs. Because the Proverbs is the business person's book. But it's day-to-day practical stuff. So I would strongly commend the first place to start, is put a practice of reading, how to make skillful choices in your life.
So in this decision-making process, step one then, pursuing the wisdom of God. What else?
So I think the other part of it is you've got to ask advice. So that's important, is take advice from other people. I think you need to take advice, firstly, from people who you can trust, who understand you. Secondly, from those who understand the nature of the decisions that you're going to make. And sometimes it's right from those who have no idea.
So step number one, pursue the wisdom of God. Step number two is seeking the counsel of others, the advice of others. What's step number three?
Well, it's a way of stepping back to gain perspective. Most of the time when we're having to make difficult decisions, we're in a stressed position. So I think from that point of view, it is worth withdrawing for time, if you can, and trying to gain a bigger perspective. So one of the things I always encourage people to do in that moment is actually to say, take a few days out and really to worship God. Now, I know this sounds strange, but I remember having to make a decision of this kind, and a great friend of both of us, is a worship leader. I rang him up and I said, look, can you come pray with me? And in that time of thinking of something other than what you have to do, you begin to get the broader picture of God at work and God operating in that way. So withdrawing to pick a bigger picture is, I think, an essential part of trying to make sure that the big decisions are the ones we get right.
A military metaphor might be retreating in order to advance. There's moments where you just pull back, gather your resources, think through tactics again, and then get ready to move forward. I have a regular discipline of however stressful things might be in the life of the church, having time set aside where I just walk in fields and just talk to God about bigger things rather than the immediacy of the situation. But essentially, that's what you're articulating, withdrawing to gain perspective.
For me, there was a formative moment of my life. I was weighing up a very big decision, which was, would I stay within the city of London, which is where the financial district is, or would I become more involved in full-time Christian ministry, paid for by church? And I recall having one of these sort of time-outs like you, and I was walking along the River Thames, which I can remember very vividly, asking God, how this was going to work out. And I can only say that at that moment, there leapt out at me as if it was, a dolphin coming straight out of the Thames. Not that there are dolphins in the Thames. A verse of scripture which I've hung on to, which said, "Stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high," the end of Luke's Gospel. Now, that was a particular word for me. I mean, the context was quite different, in which it was mentioned, but for whatever reason, that came to me with astonishing clarity. I don't think I would have had that clarity if I'd not been, withdrawing and actually talking about the future with God and just allowing Him to speak. That's an important piece.
Brilliant. What's step 4?
You're counting.
I am now. I'm slightly disappointed that they don't all begin with D.
Well,
a lot of your other ones.
Well, they could begin with P.
Oh, that would be helpful. Go on then.
The 4th is make the complex simple. I suppose at the end of the day, it seems to me that when one looks at the decisions that have to be made, at their heart are very simple choices that need to be taken. And I think we overcomplicate things. Or if it's not us, then all the circumstances, the facts, when we were surrounded by so many facts, that what we are just drowning under those facts. And what we need to do is to try and make the question simple, that we know what we're going to answer. I love the saying that we should strive for simplicity on the other side of complexity. So that what one then needs to do is, out of this complexity, to come to a simple choice. What is it that needs to be decided? Now, I know you're an expert at social media. Do you tweet?
I dabble.
You dabble in the tweet. So, and that's a good discipline, which is to say to someone, I tell you what, can you tweet it? Can you tweet the issue that you're facing to make a decision on? Can you do it in 140 characters? That's a very good mental discipline of trying to isolate the particular issues that we would face. Making it simple is really quite a process.
What's the next step?
So here's what I was looking at. In Luke chapter 20, there is a wonderful series of interchanges with Jesus. And I think one has to develop an ear to listen to the question that is being asked. Now, what question is somebody asking me that requires a difficult decision or a tough decision to be made? Jesus is brilliant. So all 3 questions were meant to catch him out. So the first question they asked Jesus is this. Those that are opposing him are saying to him, who gave you this authority? You're appearing to be, fount of wisdom. And all. Where do you get this authority from? And the interesting thing is Jesus declines to answer that question. And I learned from that not every question deserves an answer. So sometimes in a complicated price negotiation, somebody, would say to me, well, is this your client's final offer? Well, I'm not going to answer that question because we're not in that stage of the negotiation. And the answer would be, this is the offer that's on the table. So, not every question needs to be answered. Secondly, they ask him, they say to Jesus, is it right for us to pay our taxes to Caesar or not? Have you ever preached on the text, Pete? So they try and trap him.
Yeah.
It's a trapping question. And
he does answer that one.
Well, he does answer that one, but what he does is he redefines the question.
Yeah.
He's going to give them an answer, but it's not the answer that they're kind of looking for. And he then gives them the answer, give me a coin. Yeah, do you remember the
give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Gosh, and to God
what belongs to him.
What belongs to God. Because at that moment, what he is saying, in either case, he would have been trapped. If he had been speaking, saying, yes, don't pay your taxes to Caesar, he would be against the Roman authorities. If it wasn't, being on God's side, on paying the temple tax, he would be in trouble similarly. So what he does is he actually deflects the question, redefines the question. Yeah. And that, I think, is similarly, we don't always have to restrict ourselves to the options that people ask us. And then the third thing is that there's a complete sort of snarl up about the relationship of marriage. If you're married here and you're married several times because your wife has died or whatever. What would it be like in heaven? And it's a complex question, and Jesus gives a straight answer to that question. And there are times when it's a straight answer. So it's a great piece just to study Luke 20, because there he's got the three ways: don't answer, redefine the way you answer, and give a straight answer. And all three are permissible.
And the key in all three is, as you said, listening to the question.
Yeah.
So what's the next step?
Well, the next is consider the consequences. You've got to sit down, do the sums, establish the facts. Is it affordable? What is the impact on people around us? And then manage the downside risk. Now, people often say, well, when you're making a difficult decision, what do you look at? I mean, the answer is, what can go wrong? So manage that downside, check what could go wrong, and leave the upside to look after itself.
I mean, you can never eliminate risk, can you? I guess in these
nor
decisions,
should you.
there's always going to be risk.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, I think there's always going to be risk, and we should not be risk averse.
Yeah, but being aware of the risk is one of the key. Brilliant. I think that leaves us with the final step. Am I right? Have we hit 7?
I think we are. We've got the
number 7.
Number 7.
Divine number. We're expecting something good.
Divine number. Absolutely perfect. Number 7 is we implement the decision. Now, that sounds quite easy. Well, once you've decided, why don't you just go about and do it? But it's much more difficult, because Jesus says to us, we need to be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Well, I can be shrewd as a snake on Monday, and I can be really innocent on Tuesday. I mean, the real issue is, can you be shrewd and innocent at the same time? And that is, of course, what the Spirit of God does. He enables us in making our decisions to be both shrewd, i.e. understanding the world in which we're operating. Skillful decisions need to be made by being shrewd and innocent. In other words, we're not just corrupted by cynical motives, but we make the decision with that particular balance.
Ken, can you think of someone that embodies this, process of decision making from Scripture?
Yeah, I think Daniel. I'm sure you've preached on the lion's den.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
The oldies are the goldies.
The oldies are the goldies. In the opening chapters of Daniel, when he and his colleagues are drawn together into the Persian household, and they're given food that is not kosher food.
Yeah. And
there is the issue of whether they would eat it or not, because the person in charge of them has been told to look after these guys. The easiest thing would be simply say, not going to eat it. Quick decision, it isn't right. But what Daniel does is he goes to the person in the first line of management. Again, I think that's so important. Very often, or what we decide, if there's a big issue that arises, well, I'm going to go to the top. But Daniel didn't go to the top. He went to the person in the first line of responsibility. And he'd obviously thought this through quite carefully, because he says to them, look, okay, tell you what, let's do a trial period. We're going to eat vegetables and carrot juice and whatever's sort of great and healthy, and we're not going to eat any of that meat and food that is not kosher. But after 10 days, if we've started losing weight and you're going to get into trouble, and he was, the guy in charge thought his head's going to be chopped off.
Yeah.
If after this period of time we losing weight and look anemic, and tell you what, we'll call it off.
Yeah.
And we'll do as you say. I mean, I love that, because it has everything you would want in it. It's a pragmatic solution, but there's an alternative provided. And I think that the implementation, the sensitivity of the way in which we implement, is a work of the Spirit of God, who comes with us to actually find the optimal ways in which we can understand. We want to be gracious to people. We don't want to be seen to be bullying in any way or demanding. But what we do is we find ways in which we can make these decisions in an effective way and implement them.
The amazing thing about Daniel then is he holds this tension of being in the world of Babylonian culture but not being of it, and he doesn't just survive in that context.
Yeah.
He absolutely flourishes.
Yeah.
If we're going to try and apply then these 7 steps, these 7 principles, firstly then, what if you followed through all of these steps? You've made your decision and then you've realised it was the wrong one. What happens then?
The importance to recognize in those circumstances is that's not the end. That is not going to be the moment where the world collapses, because there are still options that will be given to us, and God is perfectly capable of recognizing the fact that our attitude was godly.
Yeah.
We tried to make the right steps and we didn't quite make it. But that's not the only decision we're going to make, and we learn from it.
We've spoken over these conversations about an integrated life, not compartmentalising the different parts of your life. Can you talk us through moments in your life where your career has had implications for your family, and how you make those decisions? Because it's not just about you at that point, it's about your wife and your kids. How do you make those decisions?
Well, I think you have to recognize that life doesn't move smoothly through every single day. There are seasons in our lives. And there have been seasons in my life when my head has been utterly absorbed. I mean, there was a time when I was working on a very complicated merger of 2 major companies. And I didn't talk to my wife for a week. Well, this is not...
Didn't go down well.
Well, I tell you, I learned from that, which is now that wherever I am in the world, and however complicated the work situation is, we will talk at least once a day, and I will make the call. But you need to watch out where the trend line is. And if the trend line is that you're spending all your time making decisions that, in the workplaces, but actually not looking at the effect of those decisions on those immediately around you, or it's cutting out your opportunities to serve in your church or to live a full life, that's when the red light starts flashing, and that's when you really have to start taking serious action.
Ken, how would you summarise all of this?
I couldn't put it better than Paul does in Romans 12 in the Message translation. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize that what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its own level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity within you.
Doesn't get any better than that.